Genshin Impact is a game of elements and their corresponding elemental reactions, and there are a lot of different reactions which can be quite confusing for most people. So in today's video, I'll try my best to explain all the reactions and will also rank them based on their usability and their strength. First of all, what is elemental reaction and how does it work? Elemental reactions are triggered by applying certain combination of elemental effects on a target. When an element is applied to a target, it will create an elemental aura that decays over time. Elemental reactions will occur when a second element is applied onto a target with an existing elemental aura. To know more about elemental aura and elemental gauge, you can check out Genshin Impact fandom where it is explained in detail, link in the description. Note that some skills have an internal cooldown or ICD before being able to reapply their elemental effects and therefore may not be able to trigger elemental reactions on every hit. Elemental reaction damage can be increased by elemental mastery of the character causing the reaction. The in-game interface shows the damage bonus provided by the character's current elemental mastery. This bonus will be applied in different ways depending on the type of reaction. And talking about types of reaction, there are mainly three different types of elemental reactions: transformative reactions, amplifying reactions, and additive reactions. First are transformative reactions. Transformative reactions include overload, shattered, electro-charged, superconduct, swirl, burning, bloom, hyperbloom, and virgin. These reactions deal their own instance of damage which is separate from the attack triggering them, and these reactions have a base damage determined by the type of reaction and the level of the character triggering the reaction. The base damage is then multiplied by a percentage determined by the elemental mastery of the character. The percentage can be seen in-game in the details section of the attributes page. Transformative reaction damage cannot crit and is only based on the character's level, meaning attack, crit rate, and crit damage have no impact. Transformative reaction damage also ignores the target's defense but is affected by resistance. Now let's take a look at the different transformative reactions. First is overload. Overload is the elemental reaction triggered by inflicting electro on a target that is already affected by pyro or vice versa. This reaction causes an explosion that deals AoE pyro damage in a 5-meter radius. The explosion causes significant knockback. Overloaded damage is also considered as blunt attack and can therefore trigger shatter. Overload damage does not apply pyro to the target's head and therefore cannot trigger further elemental reactions. Overload base damage is calculated as 2 times level multiplier, and the base damage of overload at level 90 is 2893.71. Overload damage is only affected by the level and the elemental mastery of the character causing the reaction and the target's pyro resistance. The elemental mastery damage bonus and the target's resistance multiplier are applied multiplicatively with the base damage. This holds true for all the transformative reactions, so I'll not be repeating this again for the rest of the transformative reactions. Next is shattered. To trigger shattered, another reaction had to be triggered that does not fit in any other category, and it is frozen. Frozen is the elemental reaction triggered by inflicting cryo on a target that is already affected by hydro or vice versa. Frozen by itself deals no damage. Instead, this reaction applies a freeze aura for a certain period of time which immobilizes the affected target. Shattered is triggered when a frozen enemy is hit by a blunt or geo attack. Shattered deals physical damage and removes the freeze aura. Inflicting pyro, electro, or anemo on a freeze aura will consume it to trigger melt, superconduct, or swirl respectively. Shattered damage is calculated as 1.5 times level multiplier, and the base damage of shattered at level 90 is 2170.28. Shattered damage is only affected by the level and the elemental mastery of the character and the target's physical resistance. Next is Electro-Charged. Electro-Charged is the elemental reaction triggered by inflicting electro on a target that is already affected by hydro or vice versa. This reaction deals electro damage over time to both the electro-charged target and any nearby target that are wet. Electro-charged target will have both a hydro and a electro aura simultaneously. The coexistence of elements make it possible for multiple reactions to be triggered on an electro-charged target if a third element is applied. For example, overload plus vaporize. The base damage of electro-charged at level 90 is 1736.2. Electro-charged damage is only affected by the level and elemental mastery and the target's electro resistance. Next is Superconduct. Superconduct is an elemental reaction triggered by inflicting electro on a target that is already affected by cryo or vice versa. This reaction deals AoE cryo damage in a 5-meter radius and reduces the physical resistance of all the enemies in that AoE by 40% for 12 seconds. Superconduct does not apply cryo to the target's hit and therefore cannot trigger further elemental reactions. Superconduct damage is calculated as 0.5 times level multiplier, and the base damage of superconduct at level 90 is 723.43. Superconduct damage is only affected by the level and the elemental mastery and the target's cryo resistance. Next is Swirl. Swirl is the elemental reaction triggered by inflicting anemo on a target that is already affected by pyro, electro, hydro, cryo, Hydro or vice versa. This reaction deals elemental damage of the non-anemo element involved and applies the said element to the targets within a 6 meter radius. Swirl damage should not be confused with the non-anemo damage that comes from elemental absorption. Swirl damage is a fixed damage based only on a character's level and elemental mastery, while the additional elemental damage from the elemental absorption is regular damage and is thus affected by the stats that normally affect damage, including attack, crit, damage bonuses, and talent levels. The Swirl reaction applies the involved non-anemo element to all the target in an AoE, except the one that the reaction was triggered upon. Pyro, Electro, and Cryo Swirl will also deal AoE damage of the involved element, but Hydro Swirl only spreads the wet status and deals damage to the target that the reaction was triggered upon. Upon triggering Swirl, the spread of the swirled element can cause secondary reactions. Damage from these reactions are based on elemental mastery and the level of the anemo character. As a result, anemo characters can indirectly cause most reactions. Swirl damage is calculated as 0.6 times level multiplier and the base damage at level 90 is 868.11. The swirl damage is only affected by the level and the elemental mastery of the character and the target's elemental resistance. Next is Burning. Burning is the elemental reaction triggered by inflicting Pyro on a target that is already affected by a Dendro or vice versa. This reaction deals AoE Pyro damage and applies 1 gauge unit of Pyro in a 1 meter radius to both players and enemies. This Pyro application has an internal cooldown of 2 seconds. Burning will apply a Burning Aura which appears as an animated version of Pyro Aura and will coexist with the underlying Pyro and Dendro auras. The Dendro aura will be steadily consumed while burning. The burning state requires both the burning and Dendro auras to maintain and will end if one of them is depleted. Burning damage is calculated as 0.25 times level multiplier and the base damage of burning at level 90 is 361.71. Next is Bloom and its two co-reactions, Hyper Bloom and Version. Bloom is the elemental reaction triggered by inflicting Dendro on a target that is already affected by Hydro or vice versa. This reaction produces a Dendro core which stays on the field for up to 6 seconds and has different effects based on if Pyro or Electro or neither is applied to it before its duration expires. Only 5 Dendro cores can exist at a time, and producing more than 5 Dendro cores will cause the oldest ones to expire immediately. If a Dendro core's duration expires, it will explode, dealing AoE Dendro damage in a 5 meter radius to both enemies and players. If Pyro is inflicted upon a Dendro core, the Version reaction will be triggered, which consumes a Dendro core and deals increased AoE Dendro damage in a 5 meter radius to both enemies and players. If Electro is triggered upon the Dendro core, the Hyper Bloom reaction will be triggered, which transforms the Dendro core into a swirling shot that homes in on the closest enemy, dealing increased AoE Dendro damage in a 1 meter radius to both enemies and players. Damage dealt to players by all the Bloom related reactions are 5% of the damage dealt to enemies. Note that one target can only take 2 instances of damage from each Bloom related reaction every 0.5 seconds. Bloom damage is calculated as 2 times level multiplier and the base damage at level 90 is 2893.71, and Version and Hyper Bloom damage is calculated as 3 times level multiplier and the base damage at level 90 is 4340.56. Bloom, Hyper Bloom and Version damage is affected by the level and the elemental mastery of the character and the target's Dendro resistance. Next are the Amplifying Reactions. Amplifying Reactions include Vaporize and Melt. Unlike Transformative Reactions, Melt and Vaporize do not deal damage of their own. Instead, they multiply the damage of the attack that triggers them by either 2 times or 1.5 times depending on which element triggers the reaction. The damage is multiplied again by a percentage determined by the elemental mastery of the character. Let's talk about the reactions now. First is Vaporize. Vaporize is the elemental reaction triggered by inflicting Hydro on a target that is already affected by Pyro or vice versa. This reaction increases the damage of Hydro or Pyro that triggers the reaction. If the reaction is triggered by a Pyro attack, the damage is multiplied by 1.5 times. And if the reaction is triggered by a Hydro attack, the damage is multiplied by 2 times. The level of elemental mastery can also increase the damage of Vaporize reaction by a certain percentage shown here. Next is Melt. Melt is the elemental reaction triggered by inflicting Pyro on a target that is already affected by Cryo or vice versa. This reaction increases the damage of the Pyro or Cryo attack that triggers the reaction. If the reaction is triggered by a Cryo attack, the damage is multiplied by 1.5, and if the reaction is triggered by a Pyro attack, the damage is multiplied by 2. The level of elemental mastery can also increase the damage of Melt reaction by a certain percentage, same as Vaporize as shown here. And lastly, Additive Reactions. Additive Reactions include a group of 3 elemental reactions that involve Dendro and Electro, which are Quicken, Aggravate and Spread. Additive Reactions also increase the damage of the hit that triggers it without dealing damage of its own. However, they provide an additive base damage bonus that adds on to the base damage in the damage formula instead of multiplying damage like Amplifying Reactions. Additive base damage bonus is a fixed amount of bonus damage added to the base damage. This damage bonus scales with the triggering party's level and elemental mastery. The additive base damage bonus provided by spread is slightly higher than that of aggravate, that being 1.25 times for the spread and 1.15 times for aggravate. The base damage bonus will be then multiplied by reaction multipliers provided by elemental mastery and artifacts before finally being inserted into a damage calculation of the attack that triggered the reaction, and will be further affected by damage bonuses, crit damage, defense and resistance. As for the reactions themselves, Quicken is triggered by inflicting Dendro on a target that is already affected by Electro or vice versa. This reaction deals no damage but applies a Quicken aura to the target affected that decays over time. Further attacks that inflict Dendro or Electro on a target affected by the Quicken aura will trigger the spread or aggravate reactions respectively, which grants the attack a flat damage bonus. This flat damage bonus at level 90 for spread and aggravate are 1808.57 and 1663.88 respectively. Spread and aggravate will not consume the Quicken aura, and the effects of the elemental reaction scales off of the stat of the character who triggers the respective reaction. The stat of the character that produced the initial Quicken aura is not considered. And the last elemental reaction that I nearly forgot about, Crystallize. Crystallize is the elemental reaction triggered by inflicting Geo on a target that is already affected by either Pyro, Hydro, Electro or Cryo. Crystallize deals no damage. Instead, this reaction generates a matching Pyro, Electro, Hydro or Cryo elemental shard that can be picked up to gain an elemental shield of the corresponding element. And yeah, that's it. There is no practical use for this reaction and it's just bad. And lastly, this is the tier list of the elemental reactions based on their strength and usability based on my personal opinion and experience. Now you know everything about elemental reactions, and if you are wondering which characters are the best to utilize these reactions, check out this video to know about that, and I'm out.